The wedding drifted into the lake like a slow-motion disaster. Chairs clattered. Champagne bottles toppled. Someone screamed for a rope. And in the center of it all, Karen Wilkins, our self-declared HOA queen, clutched a megaphone and shrieked into the wind like she could still command the situation, even as the dock floated 50 yards offshore with her niece's ceremony unraveling plank by plank. I watched it unfold from the shoreline, arms crossed, unmoving. This wasn't chaos. This was consequence. And I had engineered every inch of it. 3 weeks earlier, the first flyer appeared on the neighborhood bulletin board near the post boxes. Community wedding celebration. Join us by the lake. No RSVP required. No address listed. Just a pastel floral design and the HOA logo printed neatly in the corner. I paused when I saw it. Something about it felt off. Too polished, too public, and too vague. The name at the bottom? Hosted by Karen Wilkins, HOA president. I should have known then. Pelican Shores was a place that looked peaceful from a drone shot. White fences, glossy SUVs, hydrangeas trimmed into cubes. But underneath the picket paint perfection was a quiet war. A power struggle between residents who wanted to be left alone and an HOA that treated private property like a suggestion. Karen Wilkins had built her little empire not through charm, but attrition. Noise complaint here, lawn violation there, subtle threats of fines that never seemed to have proper paperwork, but somehow stuck anyway. I'd been hit with 2 already, one for unsightly hose storage, another for non-compliant porch lighting. I was a retired Navy structural engineer, not a lawn gnome rebel. But Karen didn't care. Then came the knock. 2 days after the flyer, she showed up on my front step, all pearls and perfume, with that trademark Karen smile. 40% charm, 60% condescension. Daniel, good morning. I was hoping to speak with you about something special, she began, not even waiting for me to invite her in. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me. Let me guess. The wedding. Her eyebrows jumped. Oh, you saw the notice. Yes, we're hosting a lakeside ceremony for my niece. It's going to be lovely, open to all, very inclusive. And your dock would make the perfect venue. I blinked. My dock? Yes, she said, as if we were discussing community mulch. We don't have any public access, quite as scenic. Yours is wide, beautifully maintained, and really, it would be doing the entire neighborhood a favor. I never agreed to that. Her smile tightened. Well, the board supports it. And I assumed you wouldn't mind, since it's just a few hours. We'll clean up afterward, of course. I shook my head. Karen, my dock is private property. You don't get to assume anything. She waved a manicured hand like swatting a gnat. Let's not get caught up in legalities. Think of the community spirit. The joy. The photos. I didn't say yes. But I didn't argue either. Because deep down, I already knew how this would end. Over the next 2 weeks, I watched the preparations unfold with quiet calculation. Caterers dropped by for measurements. A DJ scoped out the area. Folding chairs and decorative arches were stored in Karen's garage, ready to be rolled down the slope. She stopped acknowledging me altogether, like I was a patch of untrimmed hedges in her perfect vision of HOA harmony. She thought silence meant consent. It didn't. What it meant was I had time. Time to reinforce the flotation tanks beneath the dock. Time to grease the quick-release bolts. Time to install a discreet underwater latch, connected by cable to a lever I'd concealed behind a false panel in the boathouse. I didn't plan to destroy anything. I planned to let gravity and fluid dynamics do the talking. The morning of the wedding, I woke up early, not from nerves, but habit. Years of military service had trained my body to rise before the sun. I checked the cameras. Sure enough, at 6:47 a.m., Karen and a crew of caterers marched down the hill with the confidence of an invading army. By 9:30, the dock was unrecognizable. White linen, floral centerpieces, a fully stocked champagne bar, even a wireless PA system perched near my fishing stool. At 10:12, Karen posed for photos like she was the one getting married. At 10:27, she saw me standing on the hill, watching silently. She lifted her glass. I nodded back. And at 10:30, I walked to the boathouse, reached behind the panel, and pulled the lever. There was no dramatic sound, just a subtle pop of pressure releasing, the kind of noise only an engineer would appreciate. A moment later, the dock sighed, wood shifting against metal as the locks disengaged. No one noticed at first. The ceremony started at 10:45 sharp. The bridesmaids strolled in with curated grace. The flower girl tossed petals over the lake breeze. The music played from the Bluetooth speaker with obnoxious cheer. Then came the drift. A gentle nudge, like a whisper from the water. Then another. A slow slide. 6 inches. A foot. Then 2. Guests looked down, confused. One of the groomsmen pointed. The edge of the dock had separated from the shoreline by a visible gap. A murmur swept through the crowd. The flower girl stumbled. The bride, mid-stride, gasped. Champagne glasses slid an inch to the left. The Bluetooth signal flickered. Karen shouted something. Then panic took over. The DJ's table tipped over with a loud crash. The speaker fell into the lake with a splash that soaked half the front row. People screamed. Someone yelled, "Call 911," while another tried throwing an extension cord like a lasso toward a tree stump. Karen grabbed the megaphone. "Remain calm. This is all part of the aesthetic. A floating ceremony. Like Venice." It wasn't working. The groom turned green. The bride started crying. A toddler fell backward into a bowl of shrimp cocktail and started wailing. 2 paddle boats launched from adjacent properties, one of which spun in endless circles because the rowers were panicking. I stood on the hill, arms folded, watching the greatest HOA-funded disaster in the history of Lake Meredith. Then my phone buzzed. A text from my security system. Live stream online, 1,300 viewers. It had already begun. Someone had shared the feed. Teenagers with too much data plan, maybe. Or that one neighbor with the YouTube conspiracy channel. Comments flooded in. "This is better than reality TV. Karen's dock of doom. Wait, is the DJ swimming?" By the time the sheriff's rescue boat showed up, people were waving cocktail napkins like surrender flags. Karen tried to control the narrative, even giving an impromptu speech about adaptive community events through a broken microphone. The deputy didn't bother writing anything down, just smiled, and towed the dock back to shore. That evening, I received over 30 text messages. A few from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months. One from an old Navy buddy who wrote, "Just saw the clip. You magnificent bastard." I didn't reply. I just poured a drink, walked out to the shore, and smiled at the dark stretch of water. Karen had just declared war on the wrong man, and the lake had chosen its side. By the next morning, the wedding had a new name. The Drift. That's what the neighbors were calling it, short, sharp, and already whispered like legend. Someone edited together a 30-second montage from the security footage. It was cinematic. Flower petals catching the breeze, the bride screaming in slow motion, Karen flailing with her megaphone while the dock slipped away like a ghost ship. Within 12 hours, the clip had over 200,000 views. Within 24, a meme appeared, Karen photoshopped on the Titanic. Caption, "I demand the iceberg's HO'd paperwork." And through it all, Karen stayed silent. Not a post. Not a message. Not even a petty text. Which only meant one thing. She was plotting. I'd seen the look on her face as the dock floated out of reach, the twitch in her jaw, the way she scanned the shoreline like a general planning a counteroffensive. Karen didn't lose gracefully. She didn't even understand the concept. So when the community app pinged at 7:04 a.m. the next day, I wasn't surprised. Emergency HOA meeting tonight. Mandatory attendance. Agenda, addressing recent safety concerns. Karen Wilkins, HOA president. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just a vague phrase designed to reframe humiliation as heroism. I smiled and started preparing. The meeting took place in the rec center just up the hill from the lake, a squat building that usually hosted book clubs and bake sales. But that night, it buzzed like a courtroom. Dozens of residents filled the fold-out chairs, clutching water bottles and side-eyes. The air was humid with unspoken tension. Karen walked in 15 minutes late, flanked by 2 board members she'd kept in her pocket for years, Jim Reynolds and Cheryl Faust, both of whom looked like they wanted to be anywhere else. She wore her pearls. Her blouse was freshly pressed. Her walk was practiced, calm, measured, a pageant queen stride on Judgment Day. "Thank you for coming," she said into the mic. "As many of you know, an incident occurred involving the dock yesterday. While the event was meant to be a celebration of unity, unforeseen mechanical failure led to unfortunate confusion and distress." Mechanical failure? I nearly choked. Karen pressed on. "This is precisely why the HOA exists, to prevent infrastructure negligence from threatening the safety and joy of our residents." A murmur moved through the crowd. I stood up. "May I respond?" Karen blinked. "This isn't an open forum, Daniel." "It is now," someone muttered near the back. She hesitated, then nodded stiffly. Briefly, I stepped forward. There was no mechanical failure. There was a warning. I told you, in person, that the dock was private, that it was under renovation, that it was not secured. You ignored that. You dismissed it. And then you invited 200 people onto it without permission or permit. Several heads nodded. One woman in the front whispered, he told her. I heard it. Another man raised his hand. My wife slipped on a wet panel during the ceremony. You said everything was inspected. Was it? Karen started to speak, but a different voice cut her off. Paul, a retired firefighter and board member. Quiet, respected, neutral until now. He stood up slowly. Karen, he said, this wasn't just per judgment. You turned a resident's private dock into a public event space without approval. You endangered people, and you tried to spin it as a technical mishap. That's not just reckless. That's dishonest. Karen's face darkened. Let's not sensationalize this. But the room had already turned. Someone pulled out their phone and played the viral video on speaker. Karen's voice echoed off the walls. This is a floating ceremony. Like Venice. Laughter broke out, low and sharp. She banged the podium. This meeting is to discuss policy, not to attack leadership. I stepped forward. Then let's start with policy. The HOA charter does not grant the president the authority to seize private property. That's trespassing. And it violates county ordinance. Paul cleared his throat. And it violates common sense. A pause. Then a voice from the side. I motion for a vote of no confidence. Karen looked stunned. Someone seconded. It was happening. And she knew it. The vote couldn't be held that night, not officially. The bylaws required 7 days' notice. But the damage had been done. The residents walked out buzzing like a swarm of hornets finally breaking the hive. Karen left first. Shoulders stiff. Sunglasses on, even though it was nearly 10 p.m. I didn't go home immediately. Instead, I stopped by a converted barn on the other side of town, a place where the chairs didn't match, but the legal advice was deadly accurate. My attorney, Malcolm Rudd, was an old friend from my Navy days, now a land use specialist with a penchant for suing over easements. I handed him a flash drive. What's this? Everything, I said. Security footage. Audio. Screenshots. HOA bylaws. Her invitation. Her fake justification. He plugged it in. Clicked a few folders. His eyes lit up. Want to file a cease and desist? I nodded. And prep a civil claim. But send the cease and desist first. Let her sweat. He grinned. God, I love working with engineers. The letter arrived the next morning, hand-delivered, sealed, with a note from Malcolm that read simply, make sure your cameras are rolling when she opens it. At 11:37 a.m., Karen stepped onto her porch in a satin robe and picked up the envelope. She read the first line. Her face drained of color. The HOA war had just gone legal, and I hadn't even touched the real leverage yet. Because what Karen didn't know was that someone inside her own board had been leaking emails, the kind that could burn the whole thing down. It took her 3 days to respond. 3 long, silent days after the cease and desist letter landed in her hands. 3 days where Karen vanished from the walking paths, skipped her daily rounds, didn't even show up at the dog park to issue her passive-aggressive leash warnings. But silence was never her endgame. It was always the fuse before the explosion. The first sign came at 8:12 on a Thursday morning, a low rumble outside my window. I looked up from my breakfast to see a white utility truck pulling into my driveway. Bright orange decals. Official-looking clipboard in the passenger seat. Behind it, a black SUV. The door opened, and Karen stepped out like she was arriving at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. Heels, pearls, the works. She barely let the inspector knock before gliding up my porch steps. Good morning, Daniel, she chirped. Just wanted to give you a heads up. We've received an anonymous tip regarding potential environmental violations related to your dock structure. This gentleman is with the county. The inspector, a man in his early 50s named Alan, gave me a polite nod. Karen added, we're just being proactive. You know, for the health of the lake. Of course. She couldn't fight the footage. So now she was coming for the structure. I invited Alan in. Calmly. Offered him a cup of coffee, which he declined. Then I walked him down to the dock, where I had already prepared everything, laminated copies of the approved permits, date-stamped photos of the pre-construction inspections, a binder with materials invoices, and a thumb drive with engineering specs that would make a contractor weep. Karen hovered like a vulture waiting for a limp. But Alan was methodical, professional, and increasingly uncomfortable with her hovering. After 30 minutes of inspections and questions, every one of which I answered with the precision of a missile guidance system, Alan closed his folder and gave me a firm nod. Everything's in order. No violations. Your dock actually exceeds code in most areas. Karen's smile froze. Well, she said tightly, I suppose that settles that. It does, I replied, then leaned in just a bit. Next time you try to weaponize a county department, make sure the guy you're targeting didn't help write half the state's floating platform guidelines. Alan glanced at Karen. Karen didn't reply. She just turned and clicked her heels all the way back to the SUV. The very next day, the second shoe dropped. Someone, still unknown, leaked a folder of emails to the HOA group chat. Not a random post. Not a screenshot. A full .zip file of internal communications. Karen's fingerprints were all over it. Messages between her and board loyalists planning the wedding 3 weeks in advance. Discussing how to quietly set up at Dan's dock before he's outside. One email explicitly read, Can someone bring the jammer? We can't risk him catching this on the camera system. They weren't just trespassing. They were plotting to disable my surveillance. The footage went viral. But these emails? These were nuclear. Because tampering with private security wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. That night, the HOA rec center couldn't hold the crowd. Residents spilled out into the lawn. People brought folding chairs, phone flashlights, even snacks. A projector had been set up against the white-painted wall for what Paul, now acting chairman, called transparency. The first thing he projected? Karen's email about the jammer. Gasps swept the crowd. Karen sat in the front row, arms folded, expression carved from stone. Paul stepped to the front. What you're looking at, he said, is an attempt to sabotage a resident's property, then lie to the entire community about it. This goes far beyond a wedding gone wrong. He read the second email. Karen asking if someone could loop the dock camera feed. Someone booed. Another shouted, she could have gotten people hurt. Karen finally stood. This is all being twisted. Those messages are out of context. Paul held up the HOA charter. Then explained this, Article 3, Section 2. Any board member found to have endangered community safety, violated private property rights, or committed willful misrepresentation is subject to immediate removal by majority vote. No one moved. Then someone clapped. Then another. A chant began. Vote. 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 Karen tried to speak over them, but her voice was swallowed by the crowd. Paul didn't need a mic. Next week, we hold the formal vote. In the meantime, effective immediately, you are suspended from your HOA duties pending investigation. Karen didn't yell. Didn't fight. She just turned. Walked straight out the door. And for the first time since I moved in, the rec center fell completely silent. The next morning, I got a text from an unknown number. Thought you'd want to see this. Attached, a screenshot. Karen's name on a formal complaint filed with the Department of Environmental Protection as the applicant for the wedding permit. She hadn't just hijacked my dock. She put her own name on the paperwork. Meaning when the state investigated the environmental impact of the champagne buckets, the floral runoff, the generators parked directly on shoreline routes. The $6,000 fine would go straight to her mailbox. And the best part? I didn't have to lift a single finger. The lake had memory. And so did the system. The vote was set for Wednesday night. 7 days after the floating wedding. 7 days of silence from Karen, broken only by whispers and the occasional sighting of her pacing behind closed blinds. She'd gone from storming the neighborhood with her clipboard to hiding in her own fortress, windows dark, curtains drawn, Lexus unmoved. But no one was fooled. Everyone knew the storm hadn't passed. It was gathering behind locked doors. The rec center filled up 30 minutes before the meeting. By the time Paul called it to order, there were over 80 residents inside and another 20 standing along the wall. Someone had even brought popcorn. Someone else had made t-shirts. They read, Float on, Karen. Karen arrived exactly on time. No pearls. No heels. Just a dark gray suit and an expression that looked like it had been practiced in a mirror. She moved straight to the front row and sat down, hands clasped, eyes forward like she was attending her own sentencing. Paul stood at the podium. He didn't smile. This meeting is in accordance with the HOA Charter, Article 5, Section 1. Tonight, we vote on the formal removal of Karen Wilkins as HOA president. He looked at the crowd. Before we begin, Karen has requested to speak. A low murmur rolled through the room. Karen rose slowly. She took the mic, scanned the faces in front of her, not with defiance, but with something far more calculated, performance. I know I've made mistakes, she began. I know emotions are high. But I want to remind you all why I stepped up to lead this community. I wanted structure. I wanted order. I wanted to protect our standards. She paused. Let the words hang. I never meant to hurt anyone. If I crossed lines, it was only because I cared too much. About this lake. This neighborhood. About all of you. Someone coughed. Someone else muttered, "Cue the violins." Karen raised her voice. I was wrong to assume. About the dock. About the cameras. But I'm still the person who fought to fix the potholes on Birch Lane. Who got the new streetlights installed. Who stayed up late writing rules so that our home values stayed protected. She let the mic drop an inch. Then added softly, I'm asking for a second chance. For a moment, no one said a word. Then Paul cleared his throat. He didn't look moved. Thank you, Karen, he said. But what you did wasn't just overreach. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was a pattern. A culture of intimidation disguised as order. And it ends now. He turned to the board. All in favor of removal? 3 hands went up immediately. Paul looked at the remaining 2 members. Jim Reynolds, usually Karen's staunchest ally, hesitated. Then nodded. For votes. Majority reached. Paul turned to Karen. You are hereby removed as president of the Pelican Shores Homeowners Association, effective immediately. The room didn't cheer. It exhaled. Like an entire zip code had been holding its breath for 3 years and could finally breathe again. Karen stood there frozen, mic still in hand. Then slowly, deliberately, she placed it on the table. She turned toward the exit. Walked up the aisle. Past rows of former supporters who wouldn't meet her eyes. She didn't say goodbye. She didn't look back. And the door clicked softly shut behind her. That night, the neighborhood group chat exploded with messages. People thanking Paul. People reposting the vote footage. One person made a short video overlaying Karen's departure with the chorus of Let It Go. But the message that mattered most landed in my inbox around midnight. It was from a woman named Stephanie. Single mom. Had lived 2 doors down from Karen for years. Never said much. Her message read, I used to be afraid to plant sunflowers in my yard because she told me they were visual clutter. I just wanted to say, thank you. Then another message popped up. This one from Eli, the teenager with the live stream channel. Yo, you're kind of a legend now. Also, can I interview you for my YouTube? I laughed for the first time in days. The following morning, I woke up to the sound of laughter outside my window. I walked to the porch and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Neighbors. Real ones. Talking. Smiling. Working. Paul was unloading wood from his truck. Eli was helping him. 2 dads from across the cul-de-sac were already measuring new planks for the dock. Someone brought a cooler of lemonade. Someone else brought paint. And just like that, it started. The rebuilding. But not just of the dock. Of the neighborhood. People who used to stay in their garages now stood in driveways. People who whispered now laughed openly. Someone even brought over a basket of tomatoes with a note that read, to the guy who stood his ground. I didn't lead this neighborhood. I didn't want to. But sometimes the quietest one in the room ends up being the person others follow, because when the storm hit, I didn't shout. I just held the line. That evening, after the final screws were tightened and the dock stood stronger than ever, someone hung a sign at the edge of it. Not a warning. A statement. It read, Private dock. Trespassers will be drifted. We all stood around, cracking open sodas like it was the 4th of July. The sun dipped low over the lake. The water shimmered gold. And for the first time in a long time, there wasn't a single pair of designer sunglasses or HOA flyers in sight. Karen was gone. The lake was ours again. And for the first time, it felt like home. Karen didn't throw a goodbye party. There was no farewell brunch, no HOA newsletter signed with warmest regards, no emotional post about moving on to new chapters. One morning, a white moving truck pulled into her driveway, and by dusk, she was gone. No waves. No tears. Just cardboard boxes, a lot of silence, and a Lexus with tinted windows that never turned its blinkers on. The for sale sign stayed up for 3 days before it disappeared too. And just like that, Karen Wilkins, the woman who once claimed she was the rules, became a ghost in her own empire. Her name lingered in the air like smoke from a fire long since put out. The house was bought by a retired couple named Bill and Marlene. No fanfare. No open house. They showed up one morning, unloaded a few potted plants, and introduced themselves with a plate of lemon squares and an awkward smile. Bill liked to fish. Marlene liked crossword puzzles and birdwatching. In less than a week, they became the most beloved neighbors in the cul-de-sac. Funny how peace moves in faster than chaos ever does. The neighborhood didn't go back to normal. It became something better. The new HOA board, led by Paul, actually listened. Trash can complaints vanished. People could paint their mailboxes whatever color they wanted without getting fined. Someone even installed a gnome army in their garden. No one cared. Instead of patrols, we had potlucks. Instead of fines, we had fire pits. And for the first time since I'd moved here, people waved when they walked past my house, not the tight-lipped Karen wave, but the real kind. The kind that says you belong here. That's when Paul came to me with the idea. "We want to throw a little event," he said one afternoon, while helping me adjust the solar lights on the dock. A way to close the chapter properly. To reclaim the lake. Something symbolic. I raised an eyebrow. He grinned. "We're calling it the Freedom Float." The invitations were handwritten, folded into mailboxes, slipped under doormats. It wasn't an official HOA event. No forms, no permits, no rules. Just food, music, and floating lanterns at sundown. No one asked for permission, because no one had to anymore. That evening, boats gathered along the shoreline. Kids wore matching t-shirts with a cartoon of Karen screaming as a dock drifted away. Probably inappropriate. Definitely hilarious. Coolers were passed. Dogs barked. Laughter echoed. As the sun dipped low, Paul stepped onto the rebuilt dock and gave a short speech, nothing dramatic, just a few words about resilience, unity, and the strange beauty of a floating disaster bringing people together. Then he turned to me. "And finally," he said, "we want to thank the man who reminded us that sometimes all it takes to stop a bully is to build something smarter than them." He held up a golden oar. Spray-painted. Wooden. With 3 bold words burned into the blade. "Best dock defense." The crowd cheered. Someone handed me the oar. I raised it, laughing. It was absurd. It was perfect. I stood there with that ridiculous, glorious oar in my hands, surrounded by lanterns and neighbors and a lake that had forgiven everything. And for the first time in years, I felt it. Not relief. Not even pride. But peace. The kind of peace you don't notice when you have it, but miss every day when it's gone. As the lanterns drifted into the lake, a hush fell over the crowd. Dozens of soft glowing lights floated across the water, tiny suns in the darkness, each one carrying something away, a grudge, a fear, a memory. I sat back in my chair on the dock, the oar resting beside me, and watched them sway with the current. Somewhere in the distance, frogs croaked. Someone strummed a guitar. The breeze was light. The night warm. Karen was gone. The rules were ours again. And for a moment, the world was exactly the size it needed to be. The weeks that followed were slow in the best way. I rebuilt the porch swing Karen once called visually offensive. I replaced the old birdhouse. Marlene brought over tea one morning and asked about the local woodpecker population. I gave her my notes. The cameras still worked, but they didn't buzz anymore. Not with complaints. Not with threats. Just the quiet rhythm of normal life. Then, one morning, just as I stepped out with my coffee, my phone buzzed with a message from Paul. "Hank, do you know anything about someone trying to build a zip line from the hill to your shed?" I froze. Looked up. Squinted. And sure enough, 2 trees on the ridge. A new rope strung between them, leading straight down toward my roof, tied in a knot that looked suspiciously like Eli's handiwork. I stared for a long moment, then muttered, "Not again." I set down the coffee, walked toward the tool shed, already planning how to reinforce the roof. Maybe install an air horn system, because while the lake might be calm, this neighborhood would never be boring.